Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Boss Level, the show where we discuss and demystify AWS technologies and services that you can use on your cloud game development journey. My name is Melissinos. I'm the principal evangelist for the video game industry here at AWS, and I'm joined here today, as always, with my co-hosts, Tim Bruce, Dominic Mills, Gabriel Batista, and Karthik Odapally. And on today's episode, we are going to dive into some of the best practices for scaling and optimizing the use of AWS services and helping customers to assess opportunities for cost optimization, best security practices, optimized performance, and lower friction when shipping their games. And customers often run into challenges trying to meet with some of their account teams, often due to timelines for their games. So we're going to share some ideas for game developers to identify and review opportunities to optimize all of that. But before we jump in, guys, let's talk about what we've been playing. So we're not going around the horn this time. First, we're going to start with Karthik. Karthik, how are you?
I'm doing great, Chris. How are you?
Awesome. Why don't you tell us what you've been playing?
This week, I'm actually spending some time with my daughter. So we have cranked out a couple of hours on Mario Kart 8 on the Nintendo Switch platform.
Yeah.
So he is beating me.
Yeah, it's a great platform. It does equalize it for a lot of, different player types. But yeah, as we get older, our kids start to get better, right? But I do love that you're playing with your kids, right? That is super important. So,
yep.
Awesome. All right, why don't we go up to the corner here? Dominic, how are you, buddy?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I have been getting into Gigantic this week, Rampage Edition, which is kind of a MOBA style game. Reminds me a little bit of Smite, but it's third person MOBA. You have your skills, run around, you have these characters, and the whole purpose is you have these two big guardians, they're called, and you're kind of trying to take down the other guardian, and they kind of have abilities and things like that too. So it's a really nice twist on the MOBA genre. And honestly, any addition to that, I'm always willing to jump in and play. So having a ton of that this week.
Awesome. Gabriel, how about you? What are you playing, buddy? And how are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. So I've been playing a roguelike called RoboQuest. I actually came across it on Reddit. The developers did a little bit of a post talking about their new game and, how much effort it was to put it all together. And I figured I'd give it a try. And let me tell you, it has absolutely taken over my life. What a fantastic game. And the definition of less is more, right? The game is relatively simple on paper, but when you play it, it just feels good. And, I'm super excited to finally beat that last boss that's been kicking my butt for the past week.
Very cool. Yeah, and a good recommendation. Yeah, my backlog is ridiculous right now. So I haven't even touched Helldivers yet.
Oh,
so
no.
Yeah, I know it's terrible.
What's the gameplay like in RoboQuest?
So it's a roguelike. You start off, you get a chest with a few different guns. You pick it up, and then you go through a set of rooms. Destroy enemies, level up, get better weapons. But the interesting thing about the game is that it's just chock full of Easter eggs, right? Like every little corner that you go into, you find a secret room, a secret weapon, lore, and it really adds to that feedback loop that makes you want to go back and makes you want to explore. And one more run. It's one of those games.
You know what I love about our conversations here too is we always learn a little bit something about each other. I just learned that Gabriel is a completionist. Right. And so for me, that does not work for me. I'm like, okay, did we get most of what we need? All right, let's get on with it. And I had a friend who I used to play with all the time, and he's like, are you sure we went down this one hall? I'm like, I'm positive we did. No, let's just go double check. It's like, okay, now I need to get the hell out of there. So
yeah, it's a good quality for a solutions architect.
It is a great quality for a solutions architect, not so much for an evangelist, but oh, that's fantastic. Tim, how about you, buddy?
Oh, I've been going back to the world of Fallout. So
yeah,
we started watching the show. Here it got signed up for season 2. But my parents and my wife never played Fallout. So they don't know the story. They don't know the lore. So I've been taking them through a little bit, watching on Twitch as well. So a bunch of streamers out there.
Yeah. And again, one of the things, if you are a Prime subscriber, right, an Amazon Prime subscriber, you can go to the Amazon Games website, and we're currently giving away some Fallout games for free. And you get to keep them forever. So make sure, look, if you're already paying for Amazon Prime, why not go grab those free games and kind of experience some of the world of Fallout, which is just amazing. The show was unbelievable. Just really incredible, right up there with The Last of Us. And, just kind of exposing the narrative and writing and worlds of these video game environments to non-gamers and bringing more people in. So it's great to see this. And I love that we're seeing this trend of doing proper justice, right? To game narrative.
Wisely, am I right?
Yes. Although, there's a place in my heart for all of that, for most game adaptations. Not all of them, but, for most of them.
I have a confession. Yeah. I have never played a Fallout game before. I've played Bethesda games, but I've never played a Fallout game. Karthik's here too with me.
Okay, so now it is your responsibility. It is your absolute responsibility to do so, and you will not be disappointed. The world is amazing. And I remember in the last episode, I was walking out of the family room to get something to drink, and I heard one of the characters say, "War." And I was like, "Oh, war never changes," right as they were about to say it. I was like, yes. So there's all these little great nods to in-game jokes and things of that nature. It is a graphic show for sure. Just like Kill Bill is, comic book graphic, but oh my gosh, man, what a great freaking show, and great with the games. So I'm going back and playing through some Fallout stuff, but I'm also leaning in, I think I mentioned it on our last episode, playing around with Pico 8 and creating these really awesome tiny little games and going back and recreating like the first games I started programming back in the 80s. And they just released a new version of the dev environment called Picotron, which is kind of like this 16-bit big, sibling to the Pico 8 environment. And it is so joyous to go in and write tightly constrained code for these things. It's really fantastic. So that's where I've been spending some time, is just going back and revisiting the love of creating small games from back in the early days of game development. But yeah, so that's what I've been playing. That's what we've been playing. But we're going to go ahead and jump right into, again, talking about how game developers can employ some best practices for scaling and optimizing the use of these services and the environments in which they operate. So, Tim, why don't you go ahead and lead us off in the discussion? Tell us what we are diving into today.
Sure. So Trusted Advisor is a service that's available to all customers, but there are two different flavors of it. So the first is, again, for all customers, our key security checks and some service quota reporting. Now, we'll get into exactly what those mean in a bit, but just want to kind of separate out some of the pieces.
Okay, well, let me stop you there. So Trusted Advisor, it does what it says on the tin, right? It is advising you on optimizing use, optimizing costs, optimizing performance of specific AWS services that you utilize. Like when we talk about it being a trusted advisor, what is the Trusted Advisor service?
Perfect lead in. So Trusted Advisor for customers with business and enterprise support get details on how to use services best, how to configure things that could lead to better performance, better resiliency, better cost, right? So all things that matter to people trying to deliver an experience to players, right? You don't want to pay more than you need to, right? Because that takes away opportunity to invest in your game.
Right.
You don't want poor performance because your player's going to be stuck somewhere and they're going to be like, this game's fun, but it's troubling, right? And then finally, you don't want to have those outages because you didn't design it in a resilient fashion. So Trusted Advisor looks at everything in your account, how you're using it, and provides guidance on how to remediate any of the problems that it finds.
Okay, so building on and utilizing modern cloud services, more features constantly get added, more options for using them. And so it can become really complex if you're not used to dealing with those cloud service. So Trusted Advisor kind of helps identify areas you may not have realized or discovered for, again, cost efficiencies, usage efficiencies, performance efficiencies that may just be overlooked just because it's not something that a game developer typically concerns himself with when looking at building that type of infrastructure in the cloud, correct?
Correct. And so the other thing that we hear from customers about Trusted Advisor is like, hey, I don't want to pay for support all the time, right? I understand there's value there, but how do I keep my costs managed? And so you can sign up for AWS support just like you can for any other service. You can turn it on, and 30 days later, you can turn it off. So that gives you the ability to collect some data, get the feedback from Trusted Advisor, take some actions, and see your results without having to pay for us or your timing for being available.
One of the things, though, I would mention is at AWS, what we talk about with regard to our cloud services overall is that you should only pay for what you use, right? And so making sure that you are exposing areas where, again, you may have a service that is off and running and didn't understand that it was running in the background, or building those best practices to ensure that you're only paying for what you're using is really important, right, as you build these pieces out. So who else wants to jump in and talk to us about, service limits, right? Like, isn't the cloud limitless,
I'm back in 2016, I had a great mentor, Ron Southard, hit on when I asked him, hey, what are the limits of the cloud? He told me, I quote, the cloud is a managed service, not a magic service.
Oh, I love that. The cloud is a managed service, not a magic service. That is a good one.
So when we come up to customers and we talk about, let's say, DynamoDB, awesome NoSQL database that scales to really large workloads, for example, Amazon.com, their front-end website, we have a video on it. It's powered by DynamoDB. So when we talk to customers about such high-scale, high-availability services, there comes a point where the customer will ask, hey, what are my upper limits? What are my scaling limits? And the other thing they would ask is, how much time does it take when we start hitting my peak time wave of requests? So Trusted Advisor comes in and at bare minimum line that says, hey, here's how we're using your services. And not just from the service perspective, but also from a security perspective. Like, we once had a customer who created an RDS database, and in the inbound rule had a 0.0.0.0 rule. And they didn't realize that because they just kept hitting and they're creating the database. So Trusted Advisor sent in a remote report immediately saying that, hey, there's a subnet that's open to the world of this particular RDS database. That wouldn't have been caught if it wasn't for a report. So it's things like this that Trusted Advisor really tracks.
So all of that sounds good. And again, I love that quote. That is a really good one. I'm going to yoink that one and use that as well. So I love that. But I mean, okay, so when we talk about Trusted Advisor being a service, is this like, a graphic front end? Is this a single destination? What does it provide from a recommendation perspective? I know, Gabriel, you have some thoughts around, what Trusted Advisor would provide to a developer that is utilizing this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Trusted Advisor comes in essentially two flavors. You have the AWS console on the web page. That will give you a nice graphical user interface. It shows you all of the rules. And then it also gives you things like recommendations on any findings that it has, right? Because telling you that something is wrong is great, but it's even better when you know what to do to fix that particular issue. In addition, you also have the option to use the API for Trusted Advisor, so that if you want to take those findings and start to build some automatic remediations, for example, you want to be able to query those findings, you could do so, create your own little script, and be able to lean on Trusted Advisor through an API interface and kind of start to build out your own little tool to start to track your resources in your AWS account.
And I've got a bit of an axe to grind here. That sounds violent, but it is, of my opinion, like every single customer that I've talked to about Trusted Advisor, often it's not knowing about it that's the barrier. It's actually like going and looking at it and making sure that you use it. And this is, I think, where we can offer the most guidance of like, okay, I know this awesome tool exists. How do I actually make sure that I'm using it, right? Because a lot of the times it's like, yeah, but I'm not going to go to the console and look at the UI. I've got like a million tools that I have to do. So this is where I'm going to get very cliche and say, you need to habit stack, right? You need to make sure that like Trusted Advisor is in the place that you're looking every single day. It's a similar story to like developer portals, where if all of the developers' tools are not in the portal, then the portal's just not going to be used, right? But on the flip side, if everything is there, then the portal's going to be super helpful for them. They have a one-stop shop for everything. So I want to echo what Gabe said. Take Trusted Advisor and put it wherever you are. If you use Datadog for your metrics or your observability, use the Trusted Advisor integration in Datadog, and then you can get Trusted Advisor recommendations there. It has an integration with Security Hub. So if you already use Security Hub, look at your Trusted Advisor recommendations there. And if you have your own, homegrown portal that you have your developers or engineers looking at, then you can use the API to integrate it into there. So I think that's really, really important to actually getting value out of it versus it just existing, but never being looked at, right?
So when you look at customers who are slightly, let's say from the medium to large or even Excel size accounts, so when a t-shirt size that, I mean by the number of accounts they have, the number of regions they leverage. So when they start getting into the medium and above territory in terms of like, spread across regions and the number of AWS accounts they have, that actually gets very noisy. So with my current customer, what we've done is, this was back when we started, and we launched EventBridge, and they're like, you know what, this is awesome. We're going to pipe TA and combine with EventBridge and send it into a Slack room. And we're going to use Slack to look at these results, and the whole team will look at it. Well, that got old within 2 hours because, they have more than a few hundred accounts, and they have many, many, many instances, databases, front-end endpoints, firewalls, and that got noisy really fast. So customers came to us saying, yo, what is this? Like, why is it so noisy? And then the coaching that we have to give to customers is, hey, there's always a fine-tuning angle on anything that you use in AWS, right? You cannot just say, I'm using DynamoDB. I'm not going to provision it for my max capacity or throughput. Like, that's not the attitude, right? The coaching that we have to give the customer is, hey, you have to fine-tune how many notifications, what is a false positive, what is a false negative, things of that nature. There's so many layers into the alerts that we get through Trusted Advisor. Any customer, even like we're going from small to medium and above, that is a lot of data. So the coaching we give them is fine tune, and take only what you need, because if you open up that fire hose, you're going to be drenched in data.
I wish my customers came to me saying, yo, help me out. That's such a great point, though, Karthik. And another thing that folks should know is that Trusted Advisor also integrates with organizations, right? So if you do want to scope down the recommendations that you're getting, you can do that from an organization's perspective. So you can select certain accounts that you want. A final one that I think is maybe not as well known and is great because we're kind of talking about self-service, right? Like, how do you help yourself when maybe the external resources aren't there at that given moment, is that Trusted Advisor also integrates with the well-architected tool, which I think is a great tool. So for some historical context, we as AWS SAs used to run through this well-architected review with customers. And then at a certain point, we're like, hey, wait a second, why don't we just make it so that customers can do this themselves and remove us as the bottleneck, right? All we're doing is just bringing up these questions around these different pillars of well-architected and discussing them, right? Having a discussion about how this is right now and how it could be better in the future. So you can actually integrate Trusted Advisor with workloads within the well-architected tool. And it's just another way to kind of slice and dice your view of Trusted Advisor recommendations and make it applicable to the things that you want to listen to. And like you said, Karthik, remove all that noise.
Yep. I had a customer that did that, right? So they were doing a serverless game and they're doing load testing. And they were getting all this knocked out like EBS volumes from their load test. And it's like, why? I don't care about this stuff. It's just running to validate my application, my game that's running. So they went through and aligned their staff to basically projects and well architected, and then filtered down their findings within Trusted Advisor, right? And that just made it easy for them to focus on what mattered, right? Here's the game. We care about this most. When they had time, they'd go back and like, hey, is there something we could do to run the load test better? But it wasn't their key focus.
Yeah. So my question for everyone here is, how do you help customers when, they are getting these recommendations? And you touched on this a bit, Gabe, but there's like this list of recommendations that Trusted Advisor or their other tools are spitting out, right? How do they prioritize that? And how do they actually go and like action on those things in a sensible way? Because they're getting signals from everywhere. There might be multiple things that are wrong. How do they actually like go and tackle that? What's your experience been?
First and foremost, Trusted Advisor does give you recommendations for remediations on the issues. It also links you to the specific resources that it's bringing up. If it's telling you that an EBS volume is over provisioned, it will tell you specifically which EBS volume it is that you're having an issue with. There are some additional tools in AWS that you can actually leverage to automate the remediation of some of these tools. And this service also is used kind of under the hood in Trusted Advisor. So to get rid of the mystery, I'm talking about AWS Config. So Config is a way for you to manage your resources, for you to track resource changes against anything inside of your environment, and then optionally create a automated remediation for any findings that it finds, right? So if you have an issue with, let's say, a port being open that shouldn't be, rather than having to look through the findings, go figure out which resource it is, and then make that change, you can write like a simple Lambda function that will go in there, remove the specific rule that's causing the issue, and then that's one less thing that's going to pop up in your report at the end of the day, right? So you can automate some of the responses to the issues that are popping up by leveraging some of the other services and kind of bringing together essentially a toolbox, right, to automate the management of your accounts.
Well, one pattern I observed, Gabe, with that remediation, auto remediation, is in the pursuit of automation, customers are using a jackhammer approach of writing STP policies to remediate things. And what I mean by that is, so let's go with your example of, let's say, having an open port to the world, right? Like a 0.0.0.0. People are writing SCP policies, which for this use case is not a good idea, saying that nobody can use an open public subnet for any of these instances in this particular organization unit. So what happens is any services that do require like your WAF or like any EC2 instances that needs to be public facing, they won't be public facing anymore because now you create a rule saying to block all public access, right? So, and this happened to us, to a customer that we were working with, and they were like, they couldn't figure it out. And we had to engage with enterprise support to see what exactly was going on and why their instances were not able to go through the public internet and then finally enterprise support stepped in and they're like, hey, you created this rule, basically saying no public subnets, and you literally have no public subnets. So the coaching, again, going back to coaching the customers, remediation should be done the proper way and not through, like, let's say, using SCPs. They have a big template for it, but in the pursuit of remediation, they do kind of go a harsher way to do things.
And just for everyone's edification, what are SCPs, Karthik?
SCPs are service control policy, remember correctly?
Yeah.
You definitely should not be making these broad strokes, especially in organizations, because this is how you land yourself in hot water, right? You write a rule that applies to every single account in your organizations, you block whatever public access, and then all of a sudden you can't figure out why things aren't working, right? But if you're careful and you're meticulous and you start to figure out, what accounts may potentially need to be open to the world, what accounts will never ever need to be open to the world, and start to write those policies in a much more granular level, it can help to mitigate some of these issues early on. To Karthik's point, you have to be very careful, and you should not just, be ham-fisted about this and start writing these giant policies that apply to everything. Yeah, a time and a place is what I'd say.
And so that was going to be my question. So the issue that the customer had was they inadvertently wrote a rule that opened this up and exposed it, then just couldn't figure out what was going on there, right? And so really important to remember, this is a very powerful tool And so you have to be really methodical and clear about its intentions, right? So, this leans into, who has access from the developer side for these tools, right? So let's talk a little bit about access on those tools. So I understand there's like 3 different levels of access that you want to either have structured or it's available through the tool. So Tim, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the 3 levels of access is really about your support class. So if you're on developer support, you're only going to see certain things, right? And it's going to be limited to our key security checks for things like, hey, are you using MFA on your root? Right? That's a best practice. We don't want anybody not doing that. So it's going to flag it. It also checks like you don't have S3 buckets open to the world. And again, that's a best practice. So you're creating assets for your game. You've got backups of things on S3. You don't want somebody like finding your bucket, leaking your game, or worse, taking your game themselves. So on the business, enterprise, and on-ramp and enterprise support plans, developers who have access to Trusted Advisor can see thousands of recommendations, right? As Don, Karthik, and Gabe have all said, it's focusing on the things that matter, right? And going through those recommendations and peeling back some of the pieces you don't care about. It also goes through and shows you like a red, yellow, green. Red is, these are the most important things you should focus on.
Wait, what? Red is the most important?
I didn't design the UI. I just report on it.
Well, is that why you're wearing red today, Tim? Because you're the most important out of all of us?
That's right.
No. But yellow is next important. And then green is things you're good on. So you don't need to focus on them. But if you want to understand, like, why am I green? You can go peel that onion and say, like, what actually are you looking at? So I kind of wanted to toss a couple of questions to people about like, hey, I've heard these from customers. What would you say? So one of them is, I'm a smallish developer. I'm rolling out a database with my game. I don't want to pay for DBA full-time. What can Trusted Advisor do for me to make sure that my database is well-performing?
So Tim, I can take that. So we have databases, many flavors of databases, right? That's what I mean. We have many flavors of databases like the RDS, the managed storage service for MySQL and Postgres, and MongoDB. So when we have a short staff or a team, like in Amazon, how we call it as a 1 pizza or 2 pizza team, right? The developers own the end-to-end, the whole technical stack. So Trusted Advisor is blessing in disguise for teams that are really agile and do not have many resources to, to delegate or distribute their work. So for them, Trusted Advisor works with things like, are your services over provisioned or underutilized, right? So one report that can give you one example would be, let's say you're using a Redshift cluster, an 8XL Redshift cluster, and it would say, hey, you're only using 18% of your 8XL instance, right? And then that's a coaching point for the customer to say, hey, maybe I don't need 8XL. Maybe I can start with 4XL and see how much my utilization is. Again, the gradual fine-tuning topic we talked about earlier, that's going to be at play here. Like jumping from 8XL to 2XL might not be a benefit for the customer. So like going down smaller increments saying, hey, let me try with 6XL and see how my usage is, right? Things like that. Or this has actually happened with my customer where they had a tier 1. When I say tier 1, it's customer facing or customer experience impacting service where they created a database and somebody forgot to check the box for multi-AZ. And the other thing was for snapshots. So both those check boxes, they forgot because they only get click. They went through the UI. And surprise, surprise, there was some issue that happened and the database crashed and we had to restore from a snapshot. And people are scrambling to find snapshots. No snapshots, no read replicas to promote. And things like this, like if you set up like what Gabe talked about earlier with config, like even integrating with service catalog with organizations, you can create guardrails for your own technical team so they don't shoot themselves in their foot, right? So, and this is just with databases, you can do that with compute, storage, networking, all the services that we offer. Trusted Advisor gives that bare minimum, hey, start here, and then fine tune as you, as per need.
So does that mean that establishing those best practices, right, for your team, critical to using something this powerful. What kind of resources do we have to help companies establish those best practices?
We have quite a few white papers. We can share that in the show notes so folks can take a look at those white papers and blog posts on what are the bare minimum to set up with, like databases or network firewall or what if we.
Right. So when you get into business support and enterprise support, you have access to other support people who can help you with setting up the tool and way to help you best.
Everyone in the games industry is so smart, right? Everyone who's creating games. So I think oftentimes they're able to, if they're aware of something, like Trusted Advisor gives them a recommendation, they can it's just knowing that's half the battle, right? And then they can go and they fix it, or at least they feel confident in being able to do that because they're used to solving problems of all different kinds. I see support being underutilized all over the place. Like so many things that could have been like, this would have saved you so much time if you just cut a support ticket and a support engineer who specializes in that service will come and help you with that, right? And again, it's another way to just avoid building dependencies on like external teams. Like me, I don't want to be someone's bottleneck, right? So being able to leverage support is such a powerful tool. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that I've been able to help customers with is just like understanding that relying on support really can accelerate you. So if I can leave just one message on this, it would be if you got support, use it, please. It's a really, really powerful service.
Just to add on Dom's point, we obviously will share this in the show notes, but we have very interesting blog posts, Tris, that talk about like large customers, really cool customers, like let's say BMW, and many of the high-profile customers on how they use Trusted Advisor and how it helped them achieve operational efficiency goals. Now, when a customer as big and as high profile as BMW talks about it, it really means that, there's some value to looking at this service and enabling it within the customer's environment.
Yeah, especially when, a company of that size is using it for very mission critical, applications in a multi-location environment, globally. And that also leads into something that, we talked about in a prior episode about standing up multi-accounts versus singular accounts. And Trusted Advisor also works to summarize those vulnerabilities across multiple accounts, right? So this is really a tool that can overlay across any shape, size, or structure of your organization running on AWS to expose those risks, to provide information about optimization and about cost optimization as well, right? Not just single account. You can apply this across multiple accounts that a company may control or have access to.
I think we even had a high-profile customer come to Greenlight and talk about how Trusted saved them from some compliance risks as well. I don't know. We can share that in the show notes after the call as well.
Very cool.
Karthik, you are an index of reInvent talks, man.
He's got the reInvent Rolodex just in his brain.
Exactly.
Yeah, Chris, I think you were dropping some knowledge on.
Oh, yeah, no, I was going to say, in a Rolodex, for those that don't know, was a physical device on your desk that had cards in it that you would flip through. So, you always have to explain. It's kind of like explaining to, kids, well, that save icon, that is a floppy disk. That kind of, it looks like one of these, right?
You just have one sitting around. What is that?
But how do you upload data to it?
I was actually looking for my Rolodex.
Oh, actually, no, these are silicon coasters that have different languages on them that say, I am a silicon coaster, that my kids actually got me for Christmas one year. I've got so 5 of these. So, yeah. So
I thought that's what you were putting your games on.
That is for a different episode and a different show. So I do have one quick question for the team here. When we're talking about using Trusted Advisor for AWS services, again, to expose all the things that we're talking about, is this for any service that we operate or customers have access to? Are there limitations to this? Like, what type of, is it just the most common things? Can you talk a bit about how you can use Trusted Advisor across the portfolio of AWS services and technologies that we offer?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, so Trusted Advisor does not cover every single service available. As you know, we have a lot of services, but it does its best to cover the most commonly used and the ones that tend to be that can have the most impact on your architecture at the end of the day, right? Things like EC2, RDS, DynamoDB. These are all services that are very easy to deploy. They hold critical data. S3 being another great example. Having those services be watched essentially by Trusted Advisor will save a lot of headache in the long run. And, Trusted Advisor is a tool, and you have additional tools that you can lean on to ensure that your environment is in place. I believe Mark brought up earlier that we can use the well-architected tool. That's what I'm looking for. The well-architected tool to go over your environment, ask the right questions, and ensure that you're leaning on best practices wherever possible. And then, of course, most importantly, you have your account team to lean on, right? We want you to use Trusted Advisor. We want you to lean on support. We want you to use the well-architected tool. But at the end of the day, when you've done all that and you still have questions, that's why we're here, right? We can come in and run that last fine comb through your architecture before a big event, before a game release, and ensure that everything is in place like it should be.
I have just one question for you, Gabe. Did you just call me Mark?
It's an alias.
It's an alias, yes. I'm used to being called a lot of different names, but Mark is the first.
It's an acronym. Now the audience needs to figure out what that acronym means. So,
and is it a C or a K?
Sorry, Dom. I was talking to my friend Mark right before this. And,
who are you thinking of when you look at me, Gabe?
Thinking of my account manager.
There we go. Of all the things you could have been called, Dominic, Mark is that's fine. Right?
No, it's a great name. I'm not a fan.
You look like a Mark.
There you go. There you go. So look again. All right. So Trusted Advisor, really aligns with AWS best practices. It helps to prioritize important recommendations, helps to streamline collaboration across your organization and across multiple accounts you may be operating on AWS, and allows you to optimize all those resources at scale, right? So, as we were talking about here on the program, optimizing cost and efficiency, addressing those security gaps, improving performance, improving resilience, and tracking those service limits help you to run a more efficient organization, to optimize your workflow, and to go ahead and create multiple layers of access, right? Depending on who in the organization needs to have access to this very powerful tool. And while we provide a lot of these resources for you to self-service and get up and running, you have any questions, make sure you're reaching out to your contacts at AWS to make sure that you are standing this tool up and using it properly to help you realize all those benefits that we discussed. Pretty cool. One last question that I have for you about this. When we're running third-party applications on top of these core services, are there, integration points for others, again, third-party services that are running on top of AWS to utilize this? Or does Trusted Advisor just look at the base technologies underneath that those third-party tools and services would be utilizing?
I have not used Trusted Advisor. I've seen anything for third party. I wouldn't say that I've seen everything for Trusted Advisor because it's a long list. But the amount of data that we would have about some of those third party apps would be really small. So I don't know that we'd have great recommendations on that from a tool. Mm-hmm. Now that doesn't mean, don't reach out to us, don't reach out to support. We may have some best practices for running different third-party tools on AWS, but it's just not reported via Trusted Advisor.
Got it.
Yeah. One area that Trusted Advisor does report on that is kind of, I don't know if I want to call it rare, but one of the only places you can actually see this information is actually account information. So like the best check in Trusted Advisor, come fight me if you disagree, is MFA turned on? Consistently, there is always an account somewhere within the organization where MFA is not turned on and Trusted Advisor catches it. So that's not something that you could see with for example, like the compute optimizer within EC2, right? Actually seeing account level information there's not many other services that will do that. So that is a really special thing about Trusted Advisor that I like.
And for those that are listening, MFA refers to
multi-factor authentication.
There we go.
Making sure that your accounts are secure and locked down, and if someone gets your credentials, there's a backup plan.
Yes, everybody, MFA, 2FA, turn that stuff on, for goodness sake. Easiest way to provide a really good, effective layer of security to any service, not just the stuff we run here. This is a life hack for you all, right? This is best practices for just living your life connected, right, to the rest of the world. So
it's the age that we live in.
That's exactly right. Well, guys, I want to thank you again for spending time with us today and time with our audience, walking them through the benefits of using AWS Trusted Advisor. And again, here on Boss Level, our job is to discuss and demystify AWS technologies and services that you can use on your cloud game development journey. And once again, I already said, but I'm going to say it again, thanks to Tim, Dominic, Gabriel, Karthik, and Mark, wherever he may be hiding here on the show, for joining us today on this episode of Boss Level. And we'll be back with more episodes for you in the near future. Thanks, guys.